We now enter a section on the 4 postures. This continues the pattern of how to be constantly mindful of our bodies as they are right now. That means that as we walk, we're aware I am walking. When standing, we're aware we're standing. When sitting, we're aware we're sitting. When lying down, we're aware we're lying down. However our body is disposed, we're aware of that. Now this connects to the next section on full awareness. A bhikkhu is one who acts in full awareness when going forward and returning. Interesting phrasing. A bhikkhu is one, a definition here of a bhikkhu, one who acts in full awareness when going forward and returning, who acts in full awareness when looking ahead and looking away, acts in full awareness when flexing and extending his limbs, who acts in full awareness when wearing his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl, who acts in full awareness when eating, drinking, consuming food, and tasting, who acts in full awareness when defecating and urinating, who acts in full awareness when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and keeping silent. As he abides, thus diligent, ardent, and resolute, his memories and intentions based on the household life are abandoned. With their abandoning, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. This is how we develop mindfulness of the body. So these two, one, understanding the posture of our body just as it is. Just as it is. Are we aware of our posture at all times? Maybe this posture, maybe that posture, but are we aware of it just as it is right now? As we're sitting, do we know that? Are we aware of that? As we're standing, are we aware of that? And as we move from sitting to standing, another part comes up here. One part is mindfulness of what's happening, but there's also something called full awareness, clear comprehension. That means that we are aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. So when we're going forward and returning, we know what we're doing. We know that we're doing that. We also know why, and we know how, the means. What's the point of that? What's the best way to achieve it? We have full awareness when looking ahead, looking away, moving through our daily lives. These aspects, aware of our posture, exactly how our body is, and aware of what we're doing. This gives us a deep mindfulness of our bodies. We allow ourselves to become more and more aware of exactly what we're doing with our bodies at this time. As we do that, as we dedicate ourselves, and again you see that there's diligence, ardency, resolve. As we dedicate ourselves to this practice, then everything that we've carried in, all of the baggage, the material, the accumulation that we've carried into this moment is abandoned. Of course, when we come here, we remember what happened. All sorts of things have happened in our past, naturally. And one thing we can do is work through that. Of course, it's good to work through that, naturally. However, there's also the aspect of letting go of it. And, as we've seen, working through it and letting go of it aren't opposites. This is kind of like the metaphor that's used of medicine, the symptom and the source. In many ways, this is the same. Here, in the way we train, naturally, we have two groups. We've come to the point when we have two groups, as you know, and each does both. Each is working with symptom, each is working with source. But each prioritizes one. So we all do both, but we prioritize one. This group primarily prioritizes working through symptoms, as opposed to working through the source of these problems. As we work through that, as we deal with the various memories that we've had in the past, various intentions we have for the future, as we do that, we become more capable of throwing ourselves in to this kind of practice, to a practice of abandoning. How does the abandoning work? It's very simple. If we're constantly aware, I am walking when walking. Constantly aware, I am standing when standing. I am sitting when sitting. I am lying down when lying down. If we're constantly aware of that, then the other kinds of awareness can't come in. This is very mysterious. If we're fully aware of one thing, we can't be aware of anything else. It's extraordinary. Human attention is very limited, and that's very good. It's very exciting, because it means that as long as our attention is completely on one thing, all the other things are not taking our attention. As we may say, human attention is the most limited and most precious resource in the world. What we're doing here is learning how to use that resource. Because of that, we can change the world, because we know how to use the most precious resource in the world. It may seem as if we have power of different kinds, but if we can't control our attention, if we can't control our awareness, then we're just going to do whatever is motivated by whatever we're paying attention to. Behavior is motivated by perception. So if we're perceiving in a certain way, we're going to behave in that way. It's just natural. Just how it goes. It's so obvious that we forget it. You can come in here and you get the food for the meal and sit down and eat it. Okay, but why did you behave in that way? Sort of an interesting way to behave, right? You went and got food and sat down and ate it. Why? Well, because you perceived the meal, that's why. If you didn't perceive that the food was there, you wouldn't have done it. Wouldn't have gone over there to get it. It's because of that perception that you got it. Because of your perception of eating. Maybe it is enjoyable that you eat. The perception of eating. The perception of it being mealtime. Those perceptions underlie our behaviors. However, the way we behave also underlies our perceptions. If we do this thing rather than that thing, then for our future we'll perceive other things. If we come here, for example, to train, we made that decision. Rather, we made there was certain behavior there. We could have done any number of other things. But because we came here, now our perceptions have been changed. So behavior predicates, creates, is the basis of perception, and perception is the basis of behavior. They feed into each other. What this is doing is making sure that our perceptions aren't on our past memories and intentions. That's exactly what we set aside. That's exactly what we let go of. We abandon it. And that's why we train here. When we consider things in certain ways, we have certain ideas of things. For example, I was talking to someone today who realized that if you're trying to concentrate and you get distracted, and you try to come back again, then one way to consider that is, I'm failing. I'm totally failing to concentrate. But another way to frame it is, oh, look, I'm working on coming back. I'm succeeding at concentration. It's so simple. We just reframe it, and suddenly everything's different. This is highly significant because it shows how powerful our minds are. The situation didn't change at all. What was happening didn't change at all. But the way we looked at it changed. Because the way we looked at it changed, what we will do now has changed. As if we think, oh no, I'm a failure, then we're doing a number of things in that moment. One is we're thinking about how we're feeling. Another is we're feeling self-hatred or whatever it is for us that we experience when we think that we're failures. Furthermore, we feel for most people, a lack of energy. Energy decreases. Lack of self-confidence. But all of that is because of activity of our minds. The other side, if we frame it in terms of success, very different results come. The results are quite different. Perhaps we become excited, perhaps we become confident, perhaps we become energized. The situation didn't change, but the way we perceived it changed. But because the way we perceived it changed, the way we will behave in the future will also change. As if we have more energy, then we'll do the practice more fully. If we believe we can do it, then we'll give it the time and energy needed. Because our behavior has changed, the objective circumstance changes. Because that objective circumstance has changed, our perception changes. And so the objective circumstance, what's happening beyond our interpretation of it, is there. Can that change? Yes. How? Well, through various behaviors. But there's also our interpretation of it. That's what we would call our minds. The way we're looking at it, our perspective on it. That is a kind of perception that we create. We live in a fictional world, and we can change that world relatively easily if we know how, if we have the strength. What we're learning here is how to do that. But for many of us, we don't have the ability to change it. It's very sad. Those thoughts, those perceptions, those perspectives just keep on coming back day after day, year after year. And so we end up behaving in the same way day after day, year after year. We don't know how to change it because we don't understand the source of it. The source of it is the interpretation, what we're adding on to the experience, a fictional story that we're weaving into the objective circumstance. We deeply believe in these fictions. They, for many of us, are more real than anything else. They're the main aspects of our lives that determine what we will do. For most of us. Stories that we've made up, that other people made up for us, that we're maintaining. We have to see how powerful they are, and that what we're doing here is learning how to change those stories. As I say, many people can't do it all, but if you know how to do it, it's easy to do it. And that's why the person who I spoke to this morning was so excited. Oh, look, I can just say it's a success. I'm succeeding at doing mindfulness. It's not that I'm failing to do mindfulness, I'm succeeding. Boom, everything changed. This is why Kyo-san, the head monk at Sogenji a while back, when he was telling me to do weeding, he said, you really have to get this done fast. You have to do it today, because we have tea group coming. We there have a lot of guests, unlike here. We have a lot of guests. Huge groups come, hundreds of people. And we have to serve them very carefully. So we had to set up the garden for them to come and do tea. And he said, you have to finish it. And then he just said, partially joking, but someone like him is always only partially joking. He said, you know, the fastest way to weed this garden, decide that the weeds are flowers. It's the fastest way. Nothing's faster. Flowers. Boom. Weeding is done. You just change the way you look at it. If you know how to do it, excellent. You can do it easily. But if you don't know how to do it, you can't do it. Therefore, we're practicing how to do it. Again and again, we explore, how is it that I could frame this differently? And yet, even while we do that, all of that framing remains framing. It's all mind. All of it is just our interpretation. All of it remains the memories and intentions based on our life, based on our past, previous experience. Now, this mind, this way of looking at things, for most of us is the way we make major life decisions, real decisions, significant decisions, even decisions that will impact the future of this planet. It just depends on how you look at it. And I have to ask, if we have something that is as wavering, as facile, as changeable as mind, especially as the human mind, why do we trust it? Why do we trust this with our real decisions? If you came to me with a real question, something serious, like, so, Forall, teacher, I need help with this practice. This is what's happening in my practice. And it's really important for me to know, am I succeeding? I say, no, not at all. Say, oh, okay. Very good. Well, thanks for clarifying that. Well, I guess I'm not succeeding. I say, oh, you're succeeding. I say, oh, well, good. I'm succeeding. You're not succeeding, you're failing. Oh, I'm failing. Oh, no. What are you saying? Oh, no, you're succeeding. If you had someone like that, would you trust them? Say, oh, thank you. I'll dedicate my entire life to your service. But that's exactly the situation with our own minds. Hey, me, am I succeeding? Yeah. Am I succeeding? No. Am I succeeding? Yeah. Am I succeeding? No. Hey, oh, okay, very good. I'll dedicate my whole life to your service. Whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it. And then we do it. And we're surprised when our lives go in absurd directions. Why do we trust something like this? As the Buddha said, you are not your mind and you are not your body. But if you have to identify as one of them, identify as your body, because your body is much more trustworthy than your mind. Your mind is the least dependable of all things. That's what he said. The human mind is not something to be trusted. He compared it to a pit of serpents. He compared it to a raving mob, a group of gangs who are killing people. He compared it to a disease, an illness, a desert, a wilderness. These are the sorts of things he said the mind is. He said the untrained mind is the most damaging of all things. It's right at the beginning of the Anguttara Nikaya. You can look it up yourself if you want. This untrained mind is a terrifying presence in our lives. And yet, rather than being terrified by it, we happily and willingly hand over our lives to it. Yes, arbitrary opinions. Please tell me how to treat everyone I love. I'll do it immediately without questioning. And then when you criticize me for it later, I will feel ashamed of having done what you said. Doesn't make any sense. Therefore, we have these sections. We have these aspects of the training. In order to be sure we're able to go beyond the mere framing. Of course, we see how powerful this framing is. Learning how to make our minds frame. Learning how to turn our minds from our masters into tools that we use. That's the point of this training. And therefore the Buddha said, a trained mind is the most beneficial of all things. A mind that has been tamed, that has come under our control, is the most useful, the most powerful of all things. Again, it's at the beginning of the Anguttara Nikaya, you can look it up. We learn how to control the way our minds frame. But this implies that there's some wisdom beyond our intellect, beyond our opinions, beyond our preferences, beyond the memories and intentions based on our past experiences, beyond what we remember from the past, beyond what we want for the future. There's some intelligence, there's some wisdom, which needs to be made available to us. As Harada Roshi says again and again, repeatedly, he says, the body is a tool. The mind is a tool. Who uses those tools? The body is a tool. Karada ga dogu da. The mind is a tool. Sesshin ga dogu da. Who uses those tools? Dare ga kono dogu o skau ka? Who is it? We carefully examine this. What wisdom is it? What intelligence is it? What clarity is it that knows the correct way to frame a situation, that can tell the mind, frame it in this way, and then it will. What is that? We have to see that for ourselves. And then we have control over our minds, control over our bodies. Peace Pilgrim was absolutely clear about this. She said, the reason people suffer is that their self-centered nature can't really control their minds or their bodies. Therefore, there's a constant conflict. Only the God-centered nature can maintain that kind of control. And then she just says it. She's just completely, just like these nuns before, completely blunt about it, even arrogant almost. She says, for me, I have total control. Total control over my mind, total control over my body. If I tell my body, no matter what the situation is, doesn't matter what's happening, if I tell my body to be calm and quiet, it is. Period. And it'll stay that way until I say, okay, you can do what you want again. Doesn't matter the situation. Because I can tell my emotions to be still, and they are, immediately. There's no conflict. No matter the situation, I can tell my mind, be quiet, be still, and it is. And it will remain that way, without any thoughts, until I tell it, okay, you can think again. What is it? How is it? It's not a thought that she doesn't think you can think again. How is it that she says to her mind, okay, you can think again? What is it that says that? What is it that knows now it's okay to think? What is it that can say, don't think, and the thinking completely stops? When she was traveling, sometimes she didn't have anywhere to sleep, and so she'd just be put on the oily floor of a garage. And she could tell her body, be comfortable, sleep, and it would, just like that. Sit there on the cold, oily, dirty floor, perfectly comfortable, fall asleep. Just like that. What is it that says that? What is it that's able to see our bodies and our minds as tools? The significance of this text is actually to bring us to that point. And for that reason, we have to be sure that we completely set aside these memories and intentions based on our previous experience. In that way, we use our breathing. In that way, we use the postures. In that way, we use awareness of what we're doing. And then we move into the next section in which we absolutely confirm that this body is a tool, that there's nothing inherently good about it. It's a tool. How do we know that? Because we observe the foulness of the body in this section. We look at our body, we look at each part of our body, the hairs of our head, the hairs of our bodies, the nails of our hands and our feet. Of course, we have teeth, skin, bones, the various organs. We have all kinds of liquids in us, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spittle, snot, oil of joints, and urine. This body is filled up with all those things. Is any of that me? Shall we identify with any of that? Of course, nowadays in our society, we often do. It's head hairs, for example. People, I have a certain hairstyle. I am my hairstyle. Ooh, if I didn't have this hairstyle, I'd be a different person. People feel this way. We look at each of these things and we start to feel like, yes, this is me. My body is what I am. Yes. And yet if we examine it, carefully examine it, examine each part of our body, we'll notice, no, actually, not only is that not what I am, but that isn't even what I want to be. None of this is worth identifying with. We can see it clearly. And then we can move on to see the body as elements. This body is made up of elements. So nowadays we have over 100 elements that we think of in modern chemistry. But at the time, they considered there to be 4 elements. The earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the air element. These elements have different properties, and yet our bodies are composed as a physical object of these qualities. So there's an earth element, they're solid in a certain way, and yet there's a water element, they're fluid in a certain way as well. There's a fire element, there's a kind of energy in them. And there's an air element, there's this breath, the expansion and contraction aspect as well. As we observe this, we see that we start to break down the sacred grasping on to this body. And the same metaphor here is brought up again. A skilled butcher or his apprentice had killed a cow and were seated at the crossroads with it cut up into pieces. Virtually the same metaphor. The same way, we cut up this body into pieces, and the sacred aspect of it, that this is a real thing that we love, starts to break down. Of course, this is true of all bodies. It's not just our body. We also can look at other people and know that they also are disgusting. But it's much more strong when we look at it in ourselves, because we realize this that I'm using as a tool is just a tool. And then we continue on to an even more extreme case. Something which nowadays is quite offensive. People don't like it anymore. A story I've told many times about Lida going into an elementary school biology lesson to help to teach. And so she asked what they were teaching, and they said they were teaching the life cycle. She said, "Oh, very good. I'd be very interested in teaching the life cycle," because she uses dance to teach normal, common academic subjects. So they were going to make a dance about the life cycle, and she was considering a good way to do that, until she learned from the teacher that the life cycle consists of 3 stages. 3 stages? I thought there was 4 stages. What are the 3 stages? He said, well, the life cycle means that you are born, and then you grow up, and then you have children. She said, nothing else? No, nothing else. Nothing else happens after that. So that's really what you teach the kids. I said, well, of course. I said, well, it's interesting because I had thought that there was death as part of the life cycle also. I said, oh no, death is not part of life. So how could it be part of the life cycle? Yes, very logical. This is the situation we're in right now. And you'll notice, as we go through this section on the charnel ground contemplations, that we don't do things this way anymore. Nowadays, when we die, we fill up our bodies with lots of chemicals, and we cover them over with colorful chemicals, so that we don't have to face the fact that, in fact, we die. This is the solution that we've come up with nowadays. We don't do these 9 charnel ground contemplations. In fact, we don't want to contemplate death at all. And yet, it's important for us to face this body as it is. And so, we visualize this. Although, just so you know, in the ancient, not in this country, but in ancient Theravada monasteries, they would have a room filled up with human bones. And when you did these contemplations, you would go into that room surrounded by real human bones. I've done this contemplation. I haven't been able to find a human skeleton, a real rotting human body to do this with, but I have done it with animals. I found, for example, on a farm, I found a dead cow, which apparently the farmer hadn't noticed, and I have sat and considered this carefully. It's much stronger if you're really looking at a rotting corpse, but we can do it in a visualization method as well. As though he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground. So that means that the family didn't have enough money to have a full funeral. 1, 2, or 3 days dead. I don't know if any of you have seen someone who is 1, 2, or 3 days dead, but it is it's an experience that is significant. Bloated, livid, and oozing matter. A bhikkhu compares this same body, meaning his own body, with it thus. This body too is of the same nature. It will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. This body too will be just like that. This one will be like that. And he abides diligent, ardent, and resolute. And in that way, a lot of the memories and intentions based on our previous experience start to seem very insignificant, meaningless. And we continue through this. See a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground being devoured by crows, hawks, vultures, dogs, jackals, and various kinds of worms. A skeleton with flesh and blood held together with sinews, a fleshless skeleton smeared with blood, a skeleton without flesh and blood, disconnected bones scattered in all directions. Here a hand bone, there a foot bone. Here a shin bone, there a thigh bone. Here a hip bone, there a back bone. Here a rib bone, there a breast bone. Here an arm bone, there a shoulder bone. Here a neck bone, there a jaw bone. Here a tooth, there the skull. And we acknowledge this very body will be just like that, because the nature of that body and the nature of this body are the same. Some of you may know of the church built in Europe, I believe it's in France, made of the bones of the monks who have trained there. Have any of you seen this church? It's in France, is that correct? Yeah, so you can see it in pictures, but it's built of their bones. The walls are their bones, their skulls, their makeup, places to put the lights. The railings are made of their femurs and such. And right outside, and it's actually, in a strange way, both as morbid and disturbing as you can imagine, and also as inspiring and beautiful as you can imagine as well. It's very strange. But outside there's a sign that says simply, "As you are, we were. As we are, you will be." Again, as though he were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground, bones bleached white, the color of shells, bones heaped up, more than a year old, bones rotted and crumbled to dust. Bhikkhu compares this same body with it thus. This body too is of the same nature, will be like that. It is not exempt from that fate. In this way, we set aside the memories and intentions of our past life. What do we make of this? This is a way of gradually using our body to cut down through the symptoms to the source. Cut down through the symptoms. And that is a valid thing to do. Naturally here, we value dealing with the symptoms and the source. That's a good way to think about these two groups that we have. We have two groups. Each does both. Each works with symptom and source, but each prioritizes one over the other. So this group prioritizes working through the symptoms. We're going to work through the symptoms. At some point, it may be time to work with the source. Even after that, it may be time again to work with the symptoms. In any case, we value both, but we understand that neither on its own is sufficient. It's always about integration. And so, as we're dealing with these symptoms, we have certain symptoms, the memories and intentions based on the household life. A lot of what we're doing is working through those memories. We have intentions. Are they the best intentions? And yet, in order to clarify that, one way to do it is to set them aside completely and abandon them by realizing the real situation that we're in. What is the real situation that we're in terms of mindfulness of the body? Well, we're breathing. That's a real situation we're in. We have a certain posture. That's a real situation we're in. We're doing things. That's a situation we're in. We should be aware of all that, aware of it as it's happening, aware of it as the reality. Having done that, we're aware of how this body is actually composed. What is it made of? It's made of certain organs and it's made of certain elements. Having done that, we acknowledge the way the body functions of itself. What is its nature? And its nature is to fall away. When we come to this point, of course, we might feel panicked. It might be bringing us towards panic. But I can tell you, the same sense that everything's falling away, it can feel like it's going to drive us crazy. But I can tell you that the most helpful way to approach that sense of everything's falling away, the most helpful way to approach that is to approach that. That's how to approach it. Approach it. And the question is how? How can we move closer to it? And of course, there are many ways. You can sit still for a long time. You can experience extraordinary pain in your body. You can put yourself through ascetic practices. You can do various other ceremonies, the sweat lodge, for example, among them. And all of that can help us to approach this, to approach that state of mind. Another way, of course, is to do this. We're deeply aware of our body, and we use our body to bring us to the point of seeing that everything falls away. The reason that can be helpful, the reason each of these can be helpful, is that it gives us a method of approach. And within this method of approach, it is supremely important that we stay with the body sensation. We stay with the body as it actually is. Whether that means the breathing, or its composition, or its nature. We stay with it as it actually is. To stay with these body sensations, the direct experience of our body as it actually is in my experience, the best technical way. Yesterday I talked about a lot of different things, but in terms of technicality, what is the technique? Stay with body sensations. When it seems that everything is falling away, there's nothing that supports us, stay with the body sensations in that moment. Because we're led out of the body sensations, we go into a subtle, imaginary visual field in which that falling away is represented in concepts that are all based around me, and we fight with that. That's where the suffering comes from. But if we stay directly right here in this body sensation right now, and even though it will kill us, it will not overwhelm us. And that's the escape, to stay right with it, no matter what. With diligence, with ardency, with resolve, we maintain that. Having done this, having been clear with our body in this way, we then use our body. We use our body to clarify our minds, to deeply purify our minds. Hold yourselves. Hold yourselves in this place of diligence, of abandoning. Make use of this opportunity. Make use of this opportunity. Don't let any moment, don't let any opportunity, any experience slip away without maintaining this clear, full awareness of our bodies, understanding how significant it is, how important it is that we can deeply acknowledge our body as it is. We can deeply purify our minds so that we're no longer serving a master who doesn't know or care about any of us. And being our fictions, instead of that, be present right here, totally present, and find a new kind of intelligence that can guide our lives.